Welcome to another episode of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. Really excited about today's guest, Ken Nelson with Cardiacare. Ken is the chairman of Cardiacare. How you doing today, Ken?
Doing well. Appreciate you having me on, Mike.
Yeah. I was excited to get together and chat with you here. Um, usually, kind of the way we start out is just having you as the guest tell a little bit about kind of the origin story of the technology and how this whole thing came about. The ethos of the show, I like to say, is the tech is the star of the show. The guest is just the person that gets to come on the show and tell the tech
Sure.
story.
Yep.
This is for those that aren't familiar with cardiac care. This is a really exciting technology in a space that it's one of the few. I mean, I think heart failure, arrhythmia, um, both of those spaces are just really underserved in terms of what's available for patients and being able to really improve outcomes and quality of life. This is a wearable technology for those that aren't aware. And it's got an RPM component to it and also a therapeutic component to it, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want
Mhm.
to don't want to give too much out on the front end here. Don't want to steal your thunder, but certainly excited to get into that. But just tell us how, kind of, if you can, give us a little background on how the company got started.
Sure.
I know Vivek Reddy's out of it's Mount Sinai, right?
Yeah.
He's involved, but yeah, give us a little background on how the company got started and how you got involved.
Sure. Yeah. So the company was started by a guy named Amos Ziv out of Israel, right outside of Tel Aviv and Rehovot. And what was happening is his son was having symptoms of some type of arrhythmia, and there really wasn't a great technology out there to both diagnose and treat that arrhythmia. And having an ablation is an invasive procedure, and so that was kind of the premise of him wanting to develop a technology that could not only diagnose what his son was having, but also treat the arrhythmias that his son was having. And that was kind of the inspiration for him to develop the technology.
Yeah.
Then in terms of my getting involved, at the time I was running the digital health diagnostics and monitoring division, trying to build that out for a pacemaker company called Biotronic. And I was working on a clinical study for them with Dr. Vivek Reddy out of Mount Sinai. And we'd spoken for about an hour, and then he said, do you have time to stay for a little bit? I want to introduce you to this technology. I think that you're gonna get it, and you're gonna really like it. And an hour and a half later, he had gone through the Cardiacare story and kind of showed me this technology. And I'll kind of show you the watch. This is the wearable, and it's got electrodes on the bottom and underneath. You can see in the watch band. And he said to me, and this is really what got me really excited about it. He said that it was the most exciting innovation in electrophysiology since pulse field ablation. And so when you have one of the leading EPs, if not the top electrophysiologist in the world, and arguably the leading expert on pulse field ablation, which is Farapulse, Affera, these really exciting innovations that were acquired by Boston Scientific and Medtronic. And really the talk of EP is around pulse field ablation. You have that expert telling you this is the most exciting innovation in EP since pulse field ablation. You listen, and having commercialized three of the four biggest players in the world in cardiac digital health and remote patient monitoring, which is a lot of my core background with iRhythm and then biotelemetry and then Barty. And those companies are finding millions of patients. I mean, monitoring millions of patients and finding millions of patients with arrhythmias a year, to have a non-invasive technology that could not only find the arrhythmias but treat the arrhythmias is just so disruptive and so exciting, that I decided to leave what I was doing and become chairman of that company, of Cardiacare. And then in the the process, joined another half dozen cardiac startup boards over the last year. And on top of that, started a venture capital fund, MedTech Advantage Fund, on top of MedTech Innovator. And MedTech Innovator is the largest medical device and digital health startup accelerator in the world, run by a guy named Paul Grant. So it's been an exciting year, but I think the inspiration for leaving what I was doing and doing all this really came from that meeting with Dr. Vivek Reddy and learning about Cardiacare and how this could disrupt the market. And then the other thing he said that really stuck with me is that he feels this will become the standard of care, not only in treating paroxysmal AF patients, but also will be first-line therapy post-ablation in treating post-ablation patients to prevent the atrial fibrillation from coming back.
Wow. Yeah. Talk about big markets. What, so, well, yeah, I mean, let's talk about big markets. So, tell me, without going too much into the tech, because I want to go into that next, tell the audience a little bit about the use case for this type of technology. Why is a wearable important? Why is a non-invasive solution important, both for patients, as you mentioned, that would be considered primary cases where they have not had an ablation, and, patients that have had an ablation, but potentially could come back, because we all know that, high percentage of these patients that have ablations do have recurrent arrhythmia. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the
Sure.
use case, and then in that, maybe just kind of talk a little bit about what you guys would consider to be the total addressable market.
Yeah, so if you think about it, and for people who know the ablation space, it's about a 50% success rate at 3 years, which means the flip side of that is it's about a 50% failure rate, or the AF comes back 50% of the time within 3 years, which means there needs to be some other treatment for half the patients at that time. Now, those numbers are going up, hopefully, with post-field ablation. I think people are talking about maybe 70% success rate, but that's still 30% of patients that will need some sort of follow-up ablation therapy or some other therapy. So there's a huge need for something that can enhance the ablation therapy, and we feel like this isn't going to replace ablation therapy, but can enhance the ablation therapy for those patients who end up needing an ablation. The flip side of that is the paroxysmal patients, where in many cases they're using drug therapy first. We feel strongly that this could be first line therapy, and if it's not successful, and there will be patients that this therapy doesn't work on, then they can use drugs, and then if the drugs don't work, then it can go to an ablation. But to avoid that invasive procedure, I think this will be a really great option for a big subset of those patients. And then for the ones that end up needing ablation therapy, to prevent having to have that secondary, or in some cases a third ablation, this will hopefully prevent a good subset of those patients from having to do that. So we feel like it's a win-win on many levels for patients, and also to enhance ablation therapy across the board.
Two follow-up questions on that. How big is the market for the paroxysmal application, and then how big is the market for concomitant treatment of post ablation?
Yeah, I think in general, there's about 10 million patients in the U.S. that have Afib, so that's kind of the overall market. I can't remember exactly what percent of those are persistent versus paroxysmal, but a big chunk of those patients are paroxysmal. And in terms of the number of ablations a year, I think it's something like 400,000 or 500,000 patients a year are
Wow.
getting ablations. And if you talk to the electrophysiologists that are close to what we're doing, they feel like this would be widely adopted across all patients who are getting an ablation as a post-ablation first
Yeah.
line therapy.
And the you know, in the news, there's a lot of that we're hearing about pulse field ablation and the fact that, you really are burning a significant chunk of the heart. What's that? I mean, obviously that just doesn't sound good, right? Take burning a large, but can you talk a little bit about what um, what the concern is there, and why something like this would be, what are you sacrificing if you're burning a significant chunk of the heart, and in turn that, obviously this would serve as a benefit in relation to that.
Well, for one, you're burning tissue. So once you burn that tissue, in theory, that tissue is dead. And so you hope that they're burning the right areas of the heart. And so that's always a very complicated procedure. And you've got experts who have go through so much training to get there, but not everybody's perfect. And with the outcomes being 50%, at 3 years, it's not a perfect process, but it's the best thing we have to date to treat AFib. And so this is an alternative that's non-invasive, so you don't have to burn the heart, and you would be delivering neuromodulation stimulation from the wrist, so the median nerve to the vagus nerve, and not having to invasively do a procedure on the patient. So it's something that we believe is worth trying on the patient, and if it works, great. And the other subset of patients that it doesn't work on, then they would go on to have that ablation procedure, which is the standard of care right now
Yeah, and
for AFib.
there's got to be some impact on ejection fraction. When you're burning a large portion of the heart tissue, whether that, you know, it's going to impact conduction, but it's also probably likely to impact, the heart's ability to contract, ejection fraction, et cetera. So I would imagine that the potential impacts of doing so are pretty far reaching. What Let's jump into the tech. So basically, it's a remote patient monitoring technology.
Mhm.
What would be the workflow? Is the patient comes in, you get diagnosed with paroxysmal, or persistent. They have their ablation, and then they get this device. Do they wear it in perpetuity?
Yeah.
Does the stimulator work 24 hours a day, or does the stimulation is it intermittent, just when the patient is feeling symptomatic? What's the workflow?
Yeah, so great question, and right now we're in clinical study phase. So we've got a paroxysmal AF study that has started in Israel, and we're starting to add U.S. sites there, and so that one has 25 patients enrolled. There's another paroxysmal AF study that's in Israel, in India, and that one's being funded by Dr. Reddy's Laboratories, the pharma company, and they're funding commercialization and that clinical study. And that study, I believe, has something like 7 or 8 patients enrolled. And then the post-ablation study has not started yet. We're hoping to get that started very beginning of April with Dr. Reddy, Vivek Reddy, as the principal investigator out of Mount Sinai. And so there's a little bit different workflows depending on which study that you're talking about. For the paroxysmal patients, they would get diagnosed with something else, some other technology. Think about a Holter monitor or an extended patch monitor that you might get from one of the patch companies like Bardy or iRhythm or Biotel, or some of the emerging technologies like Smart Cardia. But so you think about a patient who's been diagnosed with AFib, and when they go to treat that patient for the paroxysmal piece, rather than starting with drug therapy, you could start with our Cardiacare technology, and that patient would 2 to 3 times a week would use the watch to deliver neuromodulation stimulation for about 20 to 30 minutes in each of those time periods. So 2 to 3 times a week for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then depending on their AF burden, that will vary a little bit. And then the length of time will also vary per patient. And there's some changes you can do on the how strong the delivery of the
Hmm.
stimulation is, so the patient can control that. And then there's an additive benefit. So you'll see some benefit, and then after the next time you deliver the therapy, it kind of adds on itself. So for some patients, it could, maybe it's 6 months that they need to use the technology. In other cases, it could be a year or 18 months. But we think in general, it's probably for about a year's worth of time that they need to use the technology. And then in the clinical studies, the patients would still be getting their drug therapy. So this would be additive to the drug therapy. And we want to test it that way first. And then eventually we think, ideally this could replace drug therapy. But
Mm-hmm.
first we want it to be additive to drug therapy. And then
Got
on
it.
the post ablation front, similar, but they would get an ablation done first and then similar type of 2 to 3 times a week. For the clinical study, we'll have testing done at 3 months post ablation. So we want to test throughout the blanking period, those first 3 months, and then at 6 months, at 9 months, at 12 months. So we'll have a year follow up post ablation just to see how the technology works over that year period. And so I have a much better idea post clinical studies what the average therapy will likely be. But our best guess is it will be on average about a year.
Got it. And they'll would it would be a situation where they would still wear the watch all the time though for the remote patient monitoring component of it, right? They wear it.
Yeah,
They would just intermittently use the therapeutic side, but the monitoring piece, they would just wear it like an iWatch or whatever.
yeah, and then ideally, I mean, if you see the electrodes on the bottom here, and then there's another one here, it will have, in terms of arrhythmia detection, there's ECG and PPG in the same device. So it will be able to detect the arrhythmias that are happening. And then more importantly, you can deliver the therapy right from that device. That's the more exciting disruptive piece. The initial technology will be manual, so you'll have to like manually deliver the therapy. Ideally, version 2, and this is kind of our product pipeline, it will be an auto detect and auto treat device. But we need to get clearance on this first version, and then we'll be working towards that auto detect, auto treat device.
And tell us a little bit about the health cloud, the software platform. Is that just the interface by which the physicians can monitor how their patients are doing? Is that something the
Yeah.
patients have access to? Because a lot of times there's a lot, you give
Yeah.
patients information, they start running with it. So what would that be? What would
Yeah,
that look
so
like?
so that, if you think about the way that companies like AliveCore or Apple or the patch companies today, they vary on what the patient can see. With patch companies, the patient really doesn't have any access to anything. So
Yep.
we don't want that to be the case. With our technology, the patient will be able to see the arrhythmia on their phone and also be able to see a strip on the face of the
Hmm.
watch itself. So they'll have a little bit more access to data. It will be at a much higher level than what the physician would see.
Hmm.
But we do want to have them to have some access to what is happening with their own heart to get more engaged in their own care. And we want them to know if they're having an issue and that they should be delivering therapy. So they'll know if there is an issue, and they'll know if there isn't, just because the watch will be continuously monitoring that patient. And then on the backside, what's the physician going to see? It will be similar type of data that they might get from one of the cardiac monitoring companies today. But we really only want to deliver actionable data to the physician versus just sending them lots of data and them having to sift through it, which has become an issue with some of the technologies out there today.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you routinely hear docs saying, "No more data, only insights. No more data, only insights." So yeah, for them to be able to log in and see, okay, you know, to be able to go into a patient's file and dig as much as they want, dig around as much as they want is obviously, necessary. But for them to be able to, hit a button and see which patients actually turn the therapeutic device on, or which patients had an event, is, I think, what the market's really screaming for at this point. They want to save the labor pains, deliver the baby. Um, what's the regulatory burden for something like this? Is this de novo clearance? It's different because it's not just a monitoring device, it is a therapeutic device. So what's the regulatory burden, and when potentially could we see something like this hit the market?
Yeah, so we're in clinical studies now. We are applying for breakthrough status, and we will hopefully get that. And if we get that, we'll hopefully get into the TAP program, which is the Total Product Life Cycle Advisory Program of the FDA, which is focused on cardiac and neuro. And this technology overlaps with both neuro and cardiology. So we feel like we hopefully are innovative enough that we'll get breakthrough status, and that will be a good candidate for the TAP program, and that will really help us out. And they're going to help guide us through that process if we get in. The monitoring component, so the diagnostic component would be a 510K, and then the delivery of the therapy is more unique, more disruptive, so that will have to be a different pathway with the FDA because of that. There is no predicate device on the therapy side.
Yeah. Yeah. What the I want to be sensitive to get you out of here on time, but I am curious. What's the mechanism of action? I know the ulnar nerve is involved, and it's vagal nerve stimulation, if I'm not mistaken. But
Yes.
what's the connection there to the heart? Obviously, because we've
Yeah.
learned a
So
lot about vagal nerve with epilepsy, but never with cardiac care.
so this is a better described by Dr. Reddy and some of the physicians doing the studies. But in general, it's the median nerve of the wrist, and there's a neuromodulation stimulation on the median nerve, and then that will go to the vagus nerve. And that's in general the mechanism of action. There are some studies out there talking about this. There's the Oklahoma group, Stavros and his team have published some really interesting data on that. And then we actually have a 10 patient study using our technology that shows the effectiveness of it. And we're, like I said, in the middle of 3 different clinical studies that are bigger with a
Yeah.
great number of patients to prove it.
Yeah, it's interesting that the vagal nerve would in some way control the well-being of the electrical system within the heart. It's just amazing how all these systems are so interrelated. Really
But it,
exciting technology, man.
yeah, and what's interesting is so they just had 2 different big AFib conferences, one up in Boston, the Boston AFib Symposium, and then last week the Western AF Symposium. And this is one of the things they're talking about is what is going to be that next frontier of treatment. And some of the physicians there were talking about how neuromodulation stimulation could be that answer. And some of them are very confident that that's the case, that this is going to be what really helps enhance the therapy that's out there, and could become, and we hope will become, the standard of care both on the paroxysmal patient and on the post-ablation patient. So that the fact that they're talking about this at the conferences is really exciting, and we're excited to see some of the other people that may come out and try to do what we're doing, because that will just enhance and bring confidence across the marketplace that this is the next direction
Yeah,
after
it validates the therapy.
yeah.
What when could we see something like this hit the market?
Yeah, so we're hopeful within the next 18 months, hopefully sooner. Part of this is going to be dependent on patient enrollments. The post-ablation study has a 12-month post post-ablation follow-up. So that one's going to take a little bit longer. The paroxysmal data will come out sooner. So we'll probably come to market first with that indication, and then we'll follow up shortly after with the post-ablation indication. So we're hopeful within the next 12 months or so on the paroxysmal side, and the next 18 months or so on the post-ablation side. But the nice part is the physicians I've talked about at both these last conferences about joining the study are all really, really excited. And so you'll see an all-star cast of cardiologists and electrophysiologists involved with the study at leading institutions across the country. So we're excited to be working with huge key opinion leaders who are really excited about this technology. And I think when you see the people that we have involved, it's going to bring a ton of credibility as we get some of the outcomes data from these studies.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great, man. These are the type of technologies that are needed moving forward. Everything was we went through a period in the 90s where it was, miniaturization, and then it was, endoscopic and minimally invasive, and then it was, drug device combos, which never really went as far as I thought that would go. But the early detection and external uh, therapies, after Obamacare. I call them the Obamacare products, right? Anything that's
Yeah.
lowers readmissions, early diagnosis, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the therapies that CMS is rewarding innovation for, and this falls right in line with that. So,
Well, and here's the really cool part about this is we feel strongly that we'll be able to treat at some point these acute symptoms. And so when you're treating the symptoms and it's delivering therapy non-invasively, and they're feeling that right away, that's a game changer technology. And we don't think it's just going to be treating things like PACs or premature atrial contractions, but we also feel strongly it'll be able to treat PVCs and premature ventricular contractions. So not only will we be preventing these atrial arrhythmias from reoccurring, but we think we'll be able to treat PVCs and ventricular arrhythmias as well. And honestly, as we prove this technology works, it's only the tip of the iceberg of other things that we'll be able to treat with this neuromodulation stimulation from the wrist. And you see other technologies out there treating other things, like Cala Health, for example, is treating essential tremors with a similar type of mechanism of action. So
yep.
that this is a really exciting area where you're using neuromodulation stimulation to treat things that impact other parts of the body. And so that this is just an exciting frontier to be involved with. And you'll see a lot of emerging innovation, I believe, over the years in the space. So we're at the forefront of it. We've got leading electrophysiologists across the world who are going to be involved in the studies, which makes it even more exciting.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I interviewed Renee Ryan of Cala Health in the fall, and have Sri Raghunathan from Noctrix. That I think we're going to be interviewing him next month. Amazing technology, neuromodulation technology for restless leg syndrome, which my father and I both have been afflicted with since really my entire adult life. And you know, the concept of being able to address the need, or the issue, and decrease the reliance on pharmaceuticals, the dollars make sense for the payers. And if you can, if they can get that patient off of those drugs in perpetuity, or even decrease the amount of drugs, it decreases the side effects, and just the cost. It's it's definitely one of those spaces. It's emerging, and it's still being figured out from an economics perspective a little bit, but it's got the attention of all the players at the seat, who have a seat at the table, because of the potential for not only a clinical value proposition, but an economic one. So I think you guys are well positioned. Love the technology, man. Really appreciate you taking some time to come on today. Definitely want to get you back on once you guys get a little closer to commercialization, and we'll do an update story on it. But really appreciate you taking some time to chat, and look forward to
Yeah,
staying in touch.
really appreciate it, Mike. And there's some other really disruptive, innovative companies that I'm also on the board of. Would love to dig into those as well. And one's called Heartbeam. It's got a card that you put on the chest. It looks like this. You put it on here, and you get a synthesized 12 lead, which just has so many applications. But the most exciting piece is you'll be able to detect ischemia from this device, and we'll be able to
Hmm.
deliver that 12 lead to a cardiologist who can see if a patient's having a heart attack in real time. So
Wow.
that type of technology is also really exciting. So maybe we can catch up on that on a later podcast.
I'd love that. I would love that. I've actually heard of Heartbeam from a couple people now, so that's definitely let's make a point to do that. We'll get you back on, and we can talk in further about that and some of the other technologies you're involved in.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks so much, Mike, and look forward to getting you out to Dallas here. It sounds like you may be moving out there, so that'll be great.
Yeah, we're gonna be Texas natives, or residents, I should say, sooner than later, hopefully. All right, that's it for this edition of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. We'll look forward to catching you guys on the next episode.